everything that's done. That's why there's been such an attempt to preserve the state secrets doctrine, which when Bush invoked it was so controversial, and yet now Obama administration has embraced it completely to shield executive action from any form of scrutiny, including judicial review. And one of the things that's so interesting about the diplomatic cables that were released, the thousands of diplomatic cables, is that the reaction of the media, as Greg said, was, oh, there's nothing new here. And while that's untrue with regard to a lot of the cables, a lot of them reveal some very important things, it is the case that most of the documents WikiLeaks has released, the overwhelming majority, are in fact quite banal and uninformative and uninteresting and inconsequential. And what's so significant about that is that every single one of those documents, despite being so banal and insignificant, has been stamped secret. Because it shows that what our government does is they reflexively hide behind a wall of secrecy virtually every single thing that they do of any consequence. And WikiLeaks is really one of the very few true threats to the government and corporate consortium that run the government and the national security state and the surveillance state. And that's what makes WikiLeaks so vital, is that what really is at stake is a war over internet freedom, the ability of the American citizenry to remain informed about what their government is doing. And the government realizes that there's no way to stop the technology that enables what WikiLeaks is doing. You could destroy WikiLeaks tomorrow, you could keep Julian Assange in prison for the rest of his life, and overnight there will be all sorts of other models that replicate what WikiLeaks has done. There'll be unquestionably innovations. You cannot stop technologically what WikiLeaks has begun. There's no way for the US government to prevent that. But so what they're interested in doing and what they're obsessed with doing is to create a climate of fear for any would-be whistleblowers in the future or people who want to be the new WikiLeaks. And that's what the unprecedented war on whistleblowers is about, being conducted by the Obama administration. That's the reason why Bradley Manning is being held in solitary confinement and stripped naked and degraded and subjected to inhumane conditions. It's the same reason why the Bush administration tortured people and disappeared people and put them in orange jumpsuits and shackles and showed the world what they were doing. It's a way for the US government to say that our power is unconstrained and unlimited. And if you challenge us or undermine our authority in any way, what we will do to you is without limits, and there's nothing anybody can do about it. And what it's really saying is to all future would-be people who discover government deceit and illegality and who think about exposing, who want to expose it, it's saying to them, before you do that, you should look at what's being done to Bradley Manning. And to these people whom we're prosecuting who did the same thing, that's what we can do to you. That's the government's strategy for preventing one of the very few avenues that we still have left for learning what the government does, which is whistleblowing and unauthorized disclosures. And if the government succeeds in that, then that one avenue will be extinguished. But if people who are committed to defending transparency and open government defend WikiLeaks and stand up against those efforts, then that transparency can be preserved and it can continue. And that's what I think is at stake. That's why I write so much about WikiLeaks and why I'm so glad that so many people are here to talk about it as well. Thank you very much. Ways that people who stand up to political power are discredited and undermined is by having a tax raised on their personality. You can ask Andrew Ellsberg about that. You know, if you listen to some of the media attacks on WikiLeaks, they focus on these tabloidy, personality-driven attributes of Julian Assange. You know, Bill Keller courageously reported that he actually wears dirty socks, and you know, a lot of the focus that has been directed at Julian Assange.
Bill Keller wears dirty socks?
What's that?
Bill Keller wears dirty socks?
Bill Keller socks are pristine. And you know, one of the things that I think is so important is that the scrutiny that Julian Assange has received is scrutiny that virtually nobody in power ever gets. Do you think the New York Times would ever write about the personality quirks of you leading U.S. senators or members of the House or the cabinet or anything else? So I do think that there are issues internally, like there are in most organizations. Mika earlier called Julian a flawed individual. I'm not aware of any individuals who are unflawed. But I think that in the context of what has happened, overall,
Julian Assange has fearlessly stood up to the world's most powerful factions in ways that most individuals can only dream about achieving, and whatever criticisms there are of his personality or management style pale completely in comparison to the good that he's done. And while I agree that accountability is needed for everyone, including him, I think we have to be careful not to focus on those kind of personality issues as a means of undermining and diluting the true good that Wikileaks has done. So if you look at even the events in the Middle East and the extraordinary way in which the most entrenched dictators have been overthrown pretty rapidly by some pretty disempowered citizenry that have been kept poor and uneducated, you see the power of citizens talking to one another about their discontent, persuading one another that the level of corruption is so great and the need for action is so great that massive collective action becomes possible. And there's all kinds of technologies now that allow people to build large audiences and to reach large numbers of their fellow citizens without having to rely upon corporate media entities. And I think that has succeeded greatly. I mean, just even the Bradley Manning situation exemplifies how that works. That's a controversy that took down the spokesman of the State Department who courageously spoke out against it, something quite out of character for him, but still commendable, that the president had to address and ultimately defend, and created a serious controversy that all began on internet venues that are completely independent of and even hostile to corporate media outlets. Every single day, people who work in independent media, like Amy Goodman, like a lot of us, have the ability, heightened, to be able to influence public discourse, to have ideas that used to be excluded injected into the public dialogue. I think I'm at least pretty optimistic about that trend continuing.